Hi, I'm Dungeon Master Tommy, and are you looking for terrain that'll spice up your D&D or other tabletop gaming experience? Are you overwhelmed by all of the choices and unsure of what to buy? Are you not a billionaire and want to enhance your experience without selling your blood? Well, you aren't alone. As a DM who has been running games for several years, I have learned a lot about how you can determine what product will meet your needs. This won't be a video directing you towards a specific brand or item, but rather it'll give you several things to consider before making your purchase. I have definitely been burned before by purchasing set pieces or miniatures that I only used once or twice, and as I'm sure many of you know, few things hurt worse than buyer's remorse. In recent years, I've gotten a pretty good idea of what a solid terrain purchase feels like, at least to me. There are 5 things I always consider before I finalize on a purchase: space, usability, storage, frequency, and price. I know those are some big words, and my god, there were a lot of them, but it's easy to remember with this simple acronym: FPUS. There was no other way that was going to work. It was either that or FUPS. Okay, maybe FUPS is better. Let me know if FUPS is better. Let's get into things by addressing the first letter, frequency. This is how often you'll be using whatever it is you're considering buying. For instance, this awesome cemetery set is really cool. However, it's important to think about how many encounters you plan on running here. Something like a cemetery probably won't be used for more than 2 to 3 encounters in an entire campaign, and unless you're DMing for a different group of people, it might be challenging to upcycle the same set into a different setting. Frequency is especially important to consider when it comes to dungeon sets like this. This would be awesome for a couple of sessions, but after that, how often do you plan on bringing them back to the same place with the same look and the same elements? Tied very closely into frequency is usability. Generally, the only moments in the game in which you need a physical space is combat encounters. Therefore, you should think about how feasible combat will be with the product you're buying. For instance, this tavern set has an incredible interior full of decor. However, my players would have barely any room to move around in here. Not to mention that it would be hard to reach in and move an enemy or player character without knocking something else over. Despite how good it would look, this is something that would limit the overall gameplay experience. Think about how the game would play with the product before committing to it. And do remember that yes, every campaign has a tavern or a blacksmith, but ask yourself if the party will need to physically interact with those places in your games. Most of the time, something like a tavern works just fine in Theater of the Mind. Storage is an often overlooked but incredibly important thing to consider before purchase as well. After you're done DMing for the day, you'll need a place to put everything. Additionally, if you plan on reusing it often, you'll need to be able to set it back up in a reasonable amount of time. A good example of this would be the WizKids Wizard Tower. You gotta ask yourself where the hell you're putting this thing when you're done. If you don't have space for it, consider a smaller option, or at least something that can be condensed. I would say transport is also looped into this. If the games you DM for aren't at your house, that means you're gonna have to bring all of this to the location yourself, which can definitely be a pain. Space is also crucial to take into account. As I mentioned in the Dirt Cheap Dungeon video, don't get any ideas, you sick f. More doesn't always mean better. Most casual D&D games happen at a kitchen table, and you have to make sure that the space you have to work with is adequate for whatever you're buying. This Citadel set from Battle Systems is incredible, but you're gonna need a massive table to be able to use it. Not to mention, your players might not have adequate room for their player sheets or dice rolling. Finally, the last, but certainly not least important thing you need to consider is price. This one is arguably the most important, but it's simple to account for. Just consider every other part of FUPS and then ask yourself if the product you're looking at is worth the price being charged. This is going to be different for every single DM, and you definitely should not compare yourself to someone who either has more money to burn or bigger set pieces. The fact of the matter is, by no means do you need any terrain whatsoever to make your campaigns great. All you need is some friends, a couple sheets of graph paper, and an idea. Now I know it seems like I just gave you a list of reasons why you shouldn't buy any terrain, but I promise that's not what I'm trying to do. I just want you to be very thoughtful about what you spend your money on, because sometimes it could be worth it, and other times you might regret it. I personally think the best use of D&D terrain is when you have a particular moment coming up that you want to make extra special. Like say you have an encounter coming up that requires your party to hold out in a tavern. In that case, the small confined spaces of a tavern might be exactly what you're looking for. I hope this purchasing guide was helpful to any hungry DMs watching. As always, if there's a product you think I should look at or another topic you want me to cover, please leave a comment down below. Don't forget to check out the channel for previous reviews. I'm Dungeon Master Tommy.